Hi, my name's Dave Hooper. I want to tell you a story that began with an innocent question. Back when I was just a regular guy, I'd been a career entrepreneur with some successes and failures. In other words, by this point in my life, I'd been humbled. But we were okay financially, my wife had another son on the way, and life was pretty good. That was February of 2011, which was the last normal month I'd ever have. That's when I first took a closer look at 9/11 and found something astonishing, something that would change my life. This is the story of how one simple accidental question came to be, and how it led to another, and then another, becoming a research obsession that crashed my belief system and drove my marriage, relationships, and sanity to the brink of disaster, and how out from that brink came my awakening. You can't write or talk about it, you just have to see it to believe it, and that's why this film was born. So let's start at the beginning. I was more intrigued by the type of people I came across who also had similar questions about 9/11. These weren't conspiracy theorists as I pictured them. These were people in government, aviation, civil defense, architecture, science, engineering, and the military. I decided to look further. I still had no idea the impact this would have on my life. I started by refamiliarizing myself with the incident, or I should say set of incidents. Of course, we all remember the second tower being hit, but I hadn't put much thought into the other parts of that day. And soon after looking, I was reminded that there were several incredible events on 9/11. I'd put almost no thought into the particulars of that day for 10 years. But that was about to change. In chronological order, the official version goes like this. 4 planes were hijacked by 19 mostly Saudi Arabian terrorists who then flew or attempted to fly those planes into 4 U.S. buildings: World Trade Center 1, World Trade Center 2, the Pentagon, and the U.S. Capitol. 3 of them were successful. American Airlines Flight 11 hit the first tower, the North Tower, at 8:46 a.m. United Airlines Flight 175 hit the South Tower at 9:03 a.m. American Airlines Flight 77 hit the Pentagon at 9:37 a.m. At 9:59, the South Tower collapsed after burning for less than an hour. At 10:07 a.m., United Flight 93 crashed in a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Then at 10:28 a.m., the North Tower collapsed. And I barely remembered that a third building at the World Trade Center, Building 7, collapsed at 5:20 p.m. to close out the day. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, more commonly known as NIST, backed up the official government version that intense fires weakened the steel and caused all 3 buildings to fail, including Building 7, which oddly enough was not hit by an airplane, nor was it exposed to jet fuel, which is what I thought melted the towers to get that progressive collapse started.
And you had that intense heat probably weakened the structure as well.
As I looked for answers, I found Shyam Sunder of NIST stating, "The buildings were not brought down by explosives. Until then, I didn't know explosives were even in the conversation. And like hearing a child claim innocence before a question is even posed, it had my eyebrow raised."
World Trade Center 7 collapsed because of fires fueled by office furnishings. It did not collapse from explosives or from fuel oil fires.
While researching the official government story, I saw a news flash that the 9/11 families wanted an investigation of World Trade Center 7. I was a bit surprised. Why would they be questioning the official story? That seemed a little out there, but who could be more invested than they were? So I listened to what they had to say.
Our perception of what happened on September 11th is very different from the general public's perception, I'd say, for the most part.
I believe that the public is still uninformed about most of the issues that are surrounding them.
I just don't think the public at all knows. They want to believe.
I think the truth sometimes can be frightening.
There's some deep explaining to do.
The bottom line is that it needs to be investigated.
We have to demand a new investigation. I want justice here.
Nobody ever stopped to have a scientific investigation. A scientific investigation. A scientific...
What did these families know that I didn't? It's obvious once you look, they've been trying to say something is wrong, and we need to look at 9/11 more closely, especially Building 7. And they weren't alone. I found an endless sea of organizations, rallies, websites, books, and films about that day, but I never really heard about any of them on the evening news. The families and many others were pointing to World Trade Center Building 7, the last one to collapse. It was time to take a crash course in high-rise fires. It seems that high-rise fires are more common than I thought. I found hundreds of them. According to a 2011 report by the National Fire Protection Association, there are an average of 110 fires each year in buildings over 13 stories tall. According to the report, between 2005 and 2009, there were 550 high-rise fires. Of course, there are many more all throughout history, but let's talk about some of the more startling ones. Sao Paulo, Brazil, the Joelma Building, 1974. Sparked by an electrical fire, the residential building burned twice as long as the Twin Towers, yet it stood. The underlying structure wasn't even weakened. In fact, it's still in use today. The MGM Grand, which is now Bally's in Las Vegas, Nevada, caught fire in 1980, killing 85 people. It's had a few facelifts and ownership changes, but the structure underneath was never compromised. It's still in use today. Los Angeles, California, 1988. What was then called the First Interstate Bank building burned for 3.5 hours. No structural failure at all. In fact, an insurance company moved in, and today it's known as the Aon Center. In 2004, the Parque Central building in Caracas, Venezuela, the country's tallest building, burned for 17 hours. The facade was repaired, and it is in use today. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, One Meridian Plaza, 1991, burned for 18 hours. It stood. Beijing, China, the Mandarin Oriental Hotel, burned for 6 hours in 2009. It stood. Chechny's tallest building burned for 7 hours in April 2013. It stood. Dubai, Moscow, Zurich, and on and on. I was starting to see a trend. Fires don't melt steel or cause buildings to collapse. The World Trade Center has itself burned many times with no structural failure or weakening. Some significant dates include February 13, 1975, when the 9th to the 14th floors burned for 3 hours. No damage or weakening of the structure was recorded.
The fire began in an electrical wiring closet on the 11th floor. Some fire department officials and building officials here say that there's no chance the World Trade Center could become a type of towering inferno.
And in 1993, it survived a bomb detonated in a highly vulnerable area with no structural damage caused by the fires that resulted from the explosion. There was, of course, damage from the bomb, which had to be repaired, but through it all, the towers have always stood. Sometimes buildings do collapse because of structural failure, but it's usually a design problem or earthquake damage or a controlled demolition. Buildings don't come down because of fire, but when they do collapse, they tend to tip over and stay connected. After reviewing hundreds of fires, I could find only 3 occurrences of fire bringing down a steel-framed high-rise in all of history, and all 3 were on 9/11.
About the pool of molten steel that was found in the bottom of the towers.
First of all, let's go back to your basic premise that there was a pool of molten steel. I know of absolutely nobody, no eyewitness who said so.
Get down below and you see molten steel running down the channel rails. Like you're in a foundry. Like lava.
From a volcano. The fires got very intense down there, and it actually melted beams where it was molten steel that was being dug out.
Underground, it was still so hot that molten metal dripped down the sides of the wall from Building 6.
The premise that there was a pool of molten steel. I know of absolutely nobody, no eyewitness who said so, nobody who produced it. I was on the site, I was on the steel yards, so I don't know that that's so.
Then I was at the site 2 weeks after it happened with Governor Pataki, right? And they had to cease digging that day. You know why? They were finding pockets of molten liquid metal.
In an office fire, you cannot generate enough heat to melt steel. And yet we have evidence of molten iron in the microspheres, in the rubble pile, and the metal pouring out of the side of the tower.
About 7 minutes before its final destruction, almost an hour after the plane hit, molten metal was seen coming out of the northeast corner near the 80th floor.
What was going on here? These guys at NIST are the official version. Office and jet fuel fires can reach about 1,600 degrees under ideal conditions, but NIST said that the fires burned at 1,800 degrees, which they claim was just enough to weaken and bend the steel, which led to complete failure of each building's infrastructure. But that still leaves us more than 1,000 degrees short of molten metal, which was found all over Ground Zero. They denied that molten metal existed, and they denied that witnesses heard secondary explosions going off. Even the NIST computer animation of Building 7's collapse is inaccurate, showing the outer structural walls crumpling in instead of coming straight down.
The NIST report, on which popular mechanics and much of the press has relied, is not a scientific report. It is a political document.
Squibs. Squibs are the sixth indicator on our list. In demolition vernacular, squibs refer to visible blasts from explosive charges. Often they are visible through mistiming or malfunction in some way. Usually they are hidden in the debris cloud. In simple terms, squibs are visual evidence of explosives. Squibs were recorded from the moment of the first plane impact through the collapse of the last tower. For me, they went unnoticed until I looked at the video more closely. These stills captured squibs as the towers collapsed. The official version stated these squibs were compressed air caused by the pancaking floors, which squeezed air to the point of bursting out a window. The seal of the building was already broken when the collapse began. Logically, if it was compressed air, it should have found the path of least resistance through the broken part of the building. It shouldn't have knocked out a window here or a window there, as many as 40 floors below the blast wave.
Naysayers tend to say, well, that's just air being blown out the windows. I mean, it doesn't really work to say it's just air pressure. And I've estimated these are coming out faster than 100 miles an hour.
The following clips show multiple squibs popping out, sometimes simultaneously, sometimes dozens of floors away from each other. Of all the 9/11 information I've come across, this may have been the easiest to spot. Yet it provided me with one of those stark moments in which the reality of 9/11 sunk in to a new level. In this clip, notice how the squib occurs before the floors above reach the blast ejection point. Lots of people, including politicians, the media, and emergency workers on the ground, knew Building 7 was going to come down well ahead of time, as impossible an event as that was.
But even then, they said, hey, you know, like, you got to stay behind this line because they're thinking about taking this building down. They're not sure if it's stable or not. So they were holding a line off because they had knowledge that something was going to happen.
That by noon or 1 o'clock, they told us we had to move from that triage site up to Pace University, a little further away, because Building 7 was going to come down or being brought down.
Did they actually use the word brought down, and who was it that was telling you this?
The fire department, and they did use the word, we're going to have to bring it down.
You hear that? Keep your eye on that building, it'll be coming down soon.
I didn't hear any creaking, or I didn't hear any indication that it was going to come down, and all of a sudden, the radios exploded, and everybody started screaming, get away, get away, get away from it. And the whole time, you're hearing boom, 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 boom. So, I think I know an explosion when I hear it.
We are on the phone with New York Fire Department Lieutenant David Restuccio. Can you confirm it was number 7 that just went in?
Yes, sir.
And you guys knew this was coming all day?
We had heard reports that the building was unstable and that it eventually would either come down on its own or it would be taken down.
And we were in a building in which we were trapped for about 10-15 minutes. And we set up headquarters at 75 Barclay Street, which was right there with the police commissioner, the fire commissioner, the head of emergency management. And we were operating out of there when we were told that the World Trade Center was going to collapse. The World Trade Center was going to collapse. It was going to collapse. It was going to collapse.
But it was the media's pre-knowledge of Building 7's fall that was much more telling. Several news outlets around the world reported the collapse of Building 7 long before it happened. I listened closely to these segments. Considering Building 7 wasn't hit by an airplane and no high-rise has ever collapsed because of fire, how was it that all these different news agencies reported it before it happened? How can anyone report there has been an improbable accident before the accident happens?
Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago, I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing. And indeed it has. Apparently that's only a few hundred yards away from where the World Trade Center towers were.
That one of the other buildings, Building 7, in the World Trade Center complex, is on fire and has either collapsed or is collapsing. that has structural damage as well. We saw a lot of glass broken out, and a corner of the building appeared to be in distress, and there's concern that there might actually be another collapse of that building.
We are getting word from New York right now that another building has collapsed. Is that smoke coming from this third collapse? Okay, that is what we're understanding, which makes sense because it looks like the sun is going down. But I'm hoping that enough people have cleared out of downtown Manhattan so that perhaps it wasn't as full as it might be normally around 5:30 on a Tuesday.
That information, of course, take a look at that right-hand side of the screen.
It's going down right now.
There it is.
Yep.
It went down.
Brown building, the tall one, is number 7 World Trade Center. I've heard several reports from several different officers now that that is the building that is going to go down next.
If the building was wired, lots of people had to get past security every day for a while. Remember when I said I lived in high-rises my whole life? Well, I worked in them too. And there is no way you can access buildings like those without the building security knowing. Lots of equipment had to be brought in. Authorization forms would need to be filled out. There would be drilling and pounding and dust in the ventilation ducts. Whoever was coming in would need a plausible reason to be there. They would need access to the elevator shafts. They would be taking incredible risks each day unless they had permission to access the guts of the building.
Anybody who's ever watched a building being demolished on purpose knows that if you're going to do this, you have to get at the under infrastructure of a building and bring it down.
The columns could have been set up with explosive devices during the off-hour operations of the building by elevator company personnel.
It wouldn't be a problem once you gained access to the elevator shafts.
How about an elevator modernization, which we know was going on the 9 months prior to 9/11? There are people who noted that the elevators were locked in turn and that there were guards placed at these locked elevators during the modernization.
And in the case of a steel frame building, that means we load them with RDX cutting charges, which are loaded with individual delays, sometimes as many as 2 to 3 different delays on a given floor.
I was sick to death of the dust which was appearing on the windowsills. It was dirty grey and very, very noticeable in that week leading up to 9/11.
There were workers throughout the World Trade Center that had access to the hoistway, which is immediately adjacent to the core columns and beams in the building.
The fact that there were visitors, like engineers of some kind, wandering around the floors, carrying toolboxes and cables and so on.
We're talking about several tons of nanothermite and ordinary thermite. One would have to have access through security.
Video cameras caught trucks arriving at the World Trade Center from about August 23rd until every night until about September 2nd, September 3rd. And the trucks were arriving at about 3 o'clock in the morning when everybody else had left the building, including the janitorial trucks. Something was brought into that building that would help with the detonation. There may have been work done on the detonation before. It may have been going on for months, but whatever they needed at the very end, they came and brought in that 10-day period.
The 9/11 Commission also does not tell you that Marvin Bush, the president's brother, and their cousin, Wirt Walker, were the principals of the company that was in charge of security for the World Trade Center. They don't,
The jaw-dropping coincidences kept piling up. I learned that Stratesec was a security company which used to be called Securicom, and they didn't just handle security for the World Trade Center complex. They had contracts with Dulles International Airport, from where Flight 93 departed, and United Airlines, accounting for most of the security breakdowns on 9/11. And another thing, Stratesec also handles security for Los Alamos National Labs, one of the only places on the planet that can produce the nanothermite found in the ground zero dust. The odds are pretty astonishing that one company can link so many vital elements of 9/11. But more astonishing is there's no mention of Stratesec or Securicom in the entire 567-page 9/11 Commission report. Of course, that was no surprise by now. Did I forget to mention that that same 9/11 Commission did not mention the collapse of Building 7 in the entire report either?
Why is there not a word about the collapse of that building in the 9/11 Commission report?
We didn't see any evidence of the kind of thing you're talking about.
I didn't think this was something done by terrorists anymore, nor did I think this was done by any one man, even if a president. How does he get nanothermite? How does he get NORAD, the FAA, and our air defenses to look the other way? Or get access to the interior of all 3 towers? Or get 19 guys to kill themselves? Or get NIST and the 9/11 Commission to tank their investigations? Or keep the media quiet? Or keep a rival administration from exposing it? No. This seemed much bigger than even a president, and impossible for a man on the run. If someone like me with no budget or staff can find something clearly wrong with Building 7's collapse, how could an entire government commission fail to mention it in their report? Something big and strange was coming into view, seemingly coordinated and almost invisible, like 1,000 more puzzle pieces dumped out before me. I couldn't see the bigger picture yet, but I knew there was one, and it involved powerful elements of our world. This reminded me of a quote that struck me in Woodrow Wilson's book, The New Freedom. He writes, "Some of the biggest men in the United States in the field of commerce and manufacture are afraid of somebody, are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they had better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it."